Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov gang. Tonight, a very special episode. We have a superstar guest via Skype from Montreal. Our guest this evening, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Igor Melcuk, a Russian scientist and leading reluctant dissident in the former Soviet Union. He is Professor Emeritus of Linguistics at the University of Montreal and member of the Royal Society of Canada. He left the Soviet Union in 1977 after being expelled from the Institute of Linguistics of the Academy of Sciences because he defended Andrei Sakharov in a letter published in the New York Times. Professor Melcuk, it is an honor and a privilege for you to join the Glazov gang.
It's an incredible joy because I hope that my small voice will contribute something to your strong bass that defends the only thing that is worth defending, the good future of our humanity.
Thank you very much, Professor Melcuk. Do you by any chance watch the Glazov gang?
Yes, I cannot say that I watch all of your evenings, but as soon as I have 15 minutes between two urgent things, that's the way people read detective stories, and I watch the Glazov gang.
Professor Melcuk, in your honest opinion, is it the best show on television right now or on the internet?
Yes, because it's the only show I know. So for me, it is the best by definition.
And ladies and gentlemen,
that's not quite true. I exaggerate. Okay. This morning, by chance, I happened when I do my morning gymnastics and calisthenics, I watch what I can watch, and there was a show, Obama, your so-called president, with Leno, you know, a guy who tries to squeeze off a few laughs from the public. And after 3 minutes, I have to switch the TV off. I could not stand it.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Melcuk, and we're going to discuss exactly why. I want to pick your brain tonight. It's a great privilege and honor to have you here. I want to talk about Putin. I want to talk about Obama. I want to talk about what's happening in the world today. But let's begin a little bit about you so that our viewers get acquainted with, in my opinion, a modern-day freedom fighter and soldier. Professor Melcuk, let's begin with what happened in the Soviet Union, I think roughly 35 years ago, if I'm correct. You stood up in the evil empire against the Soviet regime by yourself for a dissident called Andrei Sakharov. Tell us what happened and what made you take that stance.
You see, it is a complicated story, but I'll squeeze it into a nutshell. All the Soviet media of the time, it was in 76, for some period, were full of dirtiest attacks against Sakharov. He was accused of being a thief who appropriated some funds from the government. No, you cannot imagine what was said about him. And it was declared one day that the Academy of Sciences, of which he was a member, expelled him because all the Academy, as one person, decided that they cannot be in the same institution with him. And first of all, I had my own ideas about him. But more than that, I met him several times personally. And he became for me an icon. I'm an atheist, but still, of course, I have idols, as everybody. And he was the best among those. And when I was reading what I was reading, you know, I lost my head. I just somehow sketched a very emotional letter where I said, well, if the Academy says that they decide what they decide as one person, no, they are wrong. There are all of them minus one. I'm against it. I see in it a crime worse than against humanity, against ourselves. Well, and then I had an occasion. It so happened an American friend who was in Moscow at that time, I asked him, telling him the truth, whether he would risk the Soviet customs, etc., to take the letter to the United States. He said he will. He did. It was published immediately, and it produced some resonance first in the United States and then in Europe. 15 days later, I was dispatched from my institution, not under the accusation that I did that, because my letter was absolutely legal. I did not break any possible written rule. And I did not accuse the Soviet government or the Soviet Union. I just accused my colleagues from the academy who are just private people like myself. So they expelled me from the institute where I worked under the pretext that I am a bad linguist. Well, it was absolutely ridiculous learning by the official standards. But unfortunately, during the secret ballot by the scientific council of our institution, about 22, 23 people, one abstained, all the others voted against me. And so I was expelled from my institution. I wrote letters because, as you might know, somebody who is not working for the state in the Soviet Union more than 2 months is accused of social parasitism. And the social parasite can be arrested by the police and condemned without any trial to be exiled from Moscow, like 300 kilometers from Moscow. And if it happens, you are as well as dead because you have no protection. You cannot get a job, and without getting a job, you cannot get a permit to live there.
Right. Professor Melcuk, I apologize. These are very sacred things you're telling us about yourself. I want to hear it, but we have to get to some of the issues you want to discuss. But briefly conclude and tell us how you ended up in the West.
And, well, when it happened and I was under the pressure from the police, I did the only thing I could. I'm Jewish, and so I had an unwritten right to apply for immigration to Israel. That's what I did.
And you ended up in Canada.
Well, because I never wanted to go to Israel in the first place. I even didn't hide it. When I was asking for an invitation, I told quite openly that I prefer to go to North America, where I would like to continue with my work at the university.
Professor Melcuk, thanks.
Pro-Israeli. I believe, seriously believe, that now the future of the humanity depends on this little country.
And I hope we're going to get to that. I hope we'll have the time. Professor Melcuk, thank you so much for standing up for the truth while you lived under that totalitarian regime. And there is so much respect for you in the Glazov gang and at the David Horowitz Freedom Center that runs the Glazov gang. Professor Melcuk, let me ask you this. Tell us very briefly a little bit about Andrei Sakharov and his wife Elena Boner. What did they represent to you? What kind of people were they?
Who attacked Sakharov?
No. Tell us about Andrei Sakharov and his wife. Very briefly, your thoughts on that.
I knew his wife very briefly, so I cannot, I respect and adored her from a distance. But I met Sakharov several times face to face. 2 times when he was in hospital, and he invited me to talk about linguistics. He was curious, and it was the curiosity of a child with the knowledge of a great physicist. These 2 talks were probably the most interesting talks about linguistics in my life. And during that, you see the person, you see his purity, his sincerity. And I read in his memoirs later, some of it before, then later, I understood him. You know, he served the Soviet government. He gave them the hydrogenic bomb. Why? Because he really believed that doing such a gesture, he makes a kind of a foundation for a better collaboration between the Russian intelligentsia, scientists in the first place, and the government.
Thank you.
And he was very rudely repelled and opened his eyes. And as soon as he opened his eyes...
Thank you very much, Professor Melcuk. I want to discuss a few of the personalities and heroes there before we move on to the issues of our time. Please, very briefly, I know that this is difficult. We could spend hours on each person, a few sentences on each person that I would like to honor. To begin with, did you by any chance know two individuals named Yuri and Marina Glazov?
Of course. But we became friends and really well acquainted only in Canada, yes.
Can you tell me one or two sentences about each?
It's very difficult. What can you say of people who seem to you a kind of a reflection of yourself or a part of yourself that for some strange reason is independent and walks and eats and works somewhere else? Where I believe that we are very similar. We are kind of little splinters of the same tree. We have the same preferences, we have the same convictions, we have roughly the same behavior. That's why we became, as soon as we met for the first time, 15 minutes later, we could call each other friends, and we still are. I didn't see Marina for maybe 12 years now. It doesn't matter. I believe that she is a very close friend, and if I need something to ask for an intimate service or something, I will do it right away.
Thank you, Professor Melcuk. It was a little bit of my sense of humor to the viewers because they are my parents and they were dissidents in the Soviet Union as well, and we all became very good friends with Igor Melcuk. Professor Melcuk, a few sentences about Vladimir Bukovsky.
I never met him. I only read his texts.
Your thoughts about him?
Well, unfortunately, I never met. I saw him on TV a couple of times.
What does he represent to you? What are your thoughts about him?
A very intelligent person who, unfortunately, is not listened to enough. I believe that many of us, and among other things, Dr. Horowitz, and you personally with your gang, etc., it astonished me when I noted the first time that all of these people produce some reasonable postulates or statements about the reality. And I don't understand why millions of Americans don't stand up and go on the streets to require their country back.
Thank you, Professor Melcuk. Vladimir Bukovsky, a great hero of our time, one of the greatest leading dissidents in the former Soviet Union, continues his battle today. Did you know Boris Shragin or Valentin Turchin, or do you know anything?
Yes. This is one of the very few with whom I was very close already in the Soviet Union.
Can you give us a sentence or two about him? Valentin Turchin. Was a very complicated person, but not in the sense when you say, oh, he is good on that and bad on that. No, he was complicated in the sense that he did many different things. He was a brilliant physicist. He was a very serious computer scientist. He was a very interesting student of behavior in general. He was a very good writer. He was a very good organizer. He was a very good cook. So you see, it remains, well, we didn't meet a lot. In the Soviet Union, it was strictly professional. Afterwards, after my immigration, he was expelled from the Soviet Union much before. Because he was also a great dissident and freedom fighter?
Yes, actually, I was not even a dissident. I never participated in all this dissident activity. Why? I believe that they are absolutely right. But I liked science too much. I spent except when something practical was needed from me. It's exactly the way of meeting Sakharov. When he needed an interpreter to meet the press, and he invited me, I went right away.
Thank you, Professor Melcuk. Very briefly, we're coming to the end of our first segment, and I want our viewers to get a taste of this because we're talking about the cream of the crop of freedom fighters in the former Soviet Union. Solzhenitsyn, Varlam Shalamov, Igor Melcuk. Very quickly, your thoughts on that. And a lot of people that think that Solzhenitsyn was a great man, of course he was, but there are some questionable things about whether he really stood for democracy and freedom. My father was very disappointed in how critical he was of dissidents. Could you speak for a minute or two on that?
that will be very difficult for me, because for me to discover his other ego, which was hidden from me and from the whole world for many years, was a terrible blow. He was simply a rabid anti-Semite. And that is the end of the story.
But
I can't understand how a person like him, with such a talent, with such a will, with such an ability to withstand and create this incredibly important work, which is Archipelago, Gulag Archipelago,
Gulag Archipelago, and it was a great testament against the Soviet regime and its evil, but yet simultaneously also ended up shaking Putin's hand.
Exactly, and even more than that. And I have no explanation for that, except old philosophical maxim that people can have different aspects.
Professor Melcuk, we are running out of time in our first segment. We have named a few great fighters for freedom in the Soviet Union. Many of them we could continue to speak about. You and Solzhenitsyn and Shalamov that spoke the truth, and Bukovsky, Salishkovsky, so many people. And yet today, Professor Melcuk, it seems like there's a re-Brezhnevization, if you could say, or a re-Sovietization. The KGB's back in power. Let me ask this with the last minute we have. Was it all a waste? Was the fight for freedom all a waste? What good did it do? Now, I'm being sarcastic and cynical, and I'm not, I believe that the fight for the truth always counts, but how do you feel as somebody that fought for the truth and to see the depressing situation in Russia today?
Well, I'm an old romantic. I believe that if you have to die, it's better to die fighting back than to die on your knees, in your face, down in the mud. So I believe that all this movement, even if it did not produce tangible fruits right now, was extremely important for the Soviet Union, for the Russian nation, for our neighbors, for the whole world. Something remained. You cannot really eradicate what all these people contributed to human, what you can call it, I don't know, like a general conscience of the humanity, which exists. People are related through millions or billions of different links, knowledge, ideas, kind of nuances in your behavior. And all these people contributed to that. Yes, re-Stalinization is now in full swing, unfortunately.
Professor Melcuk, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our first segment, but now that our viewers see this modern-day titan we have at the Glazov gang visiting us via Skype from Montreal, and this is a reluctant former Soviet dissident, brilliant, genius man, and now in our second segment, we're going to pick this freedom fighter's brain about Putin, Obama, and the state of the world. Don't miss it. Join us back in one moment. Good night.